So Fidel Castro passes away. We need to understand what that means for us.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Our universities and colleges are a resource for us here, and we pick on Providence College tonight for some expertise on what's going on in Cuba and the relationship between Cuba and America with a professor originally from Cuba, working at Providence College tonight. You'll meet her coming up. How are you? Thanks for tuning in to My State of Mind on this Wednesday evening. Let's go right to the rundown, check on some things that are happening there. This is percolating now. Many of you may know that we record our program. You see it at 7:30 at IRI-TV or Fox Providence at midnight, but we record it in the early afternoon. And so this story was kind of developing in Charlotte as the prosecutor down there, after consulting what he says are 15 other prosecutors, decides that there will be no charges for this gentleman who lost his life on September 20th. And of course, Mr. Scott lost his life, the prosecutors now say, because he just didn't drop the gun. The video, if you remember, had his wife, right there, that's her video, screaming at law enforcement about what they had done, and she was advising him not to. Now we find out that he had a gun, perhaps not pointed at the officers, but certainly there's all sorts of proof, and if you watch the press conference today at all, you know that there was an abundance of proof that the officers did what they are lawfully expected to do. Now, the key will be whether or not the message is received, and a lot will have to do with how the family accepts this decision by the prosecutor. So think this thing through. Hopefully in Charlotte they do, and the ensuing protests that we've seen across the country, those who did perhaps want to think twice. We'll see how that goes. In the meantime, it is all about the Secretary of State's position, right? Mitt Romney had dinner with the president-elect last night, and I have to tell you, with this kind of either Donald Trump is showing up Mitt Romney, or this thing is coming close to a deal, don't you think? Here's the latest from CBS.
President-elect Donald Trump held his second meeting with Mitt Romney, this one over French cooking inside his Trump International Hotel. Also on the menu, Secretary of State.
He did something I tried to do and was unsuccessful in accomplishing. He won the general election, and he continues with a message of inclusion and bringing people together.
Sources tell CBS News Mr. Trump's choices are Romney, retired General David Petraeus, and Rudy Giuliani. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Corker, who met with Mr. Trump yesterday, underscored the importance of cabinet cohesion.
The world needs to know that the Secretary of State is someone who speaks fully for the president.
Elsewhere in the cabinet, the president-elect went with insiders and Washington power brokers. Steve Mnuchin will be Mr. Trump's pick for Secretary of Treasury. Mnuchin is a former Goldman Sachs partner, movie producer, and Democratic donor. He served as candidate Trump's campaign finance chairman, but has never held a position in the U.S. government. Elaine Chao was nominated as Transportation Secretary. Chao served 8 years as Labor Secretary for President George W. Bush and is married to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Have you accepted the job as Commerce Secretary?
Mr. Trump also intends to nominate 79-year-old businessman Wilbur Ross to lead the Commerce Department. With a net worth of almost $3 billion, Ross has made his fortune buying and turning around distressed companies in bankruptcy. Ross told Charlie Rose in a 2010 interview he believes reviving American manufacturing is critical to the country's global economic standing.
I really feel that within 5 or 10 years, we could be a second-rate power.
Going backwards from Mr. Ross and back through that lengthy report, some would ask, why would a 79-year-old guy worth $2.9 billion put himself up for this? I would ask, why wouldn't he? With so much expertise and so much ability to turn around the economy or have an influence on it, we should applaud that decision. This may be one of the better decisions that Donald Trump is going to make. In the meantime, the decision on Mitt Romney is going to have to be made sooner than later, it seems to me, because there's just too many. Frankly, there aren't a lot of choices. However, it seems to me that Mitt Romney is going to have to say something to try to, pair together that which he had to say in the campaign and that which he has to say now. They are two completely different worlds. And something's got to be gnawing at him, because there's no doubt a lot gnawing at the American public over all this, don't you think? Meanwhile, in Washington, Nancy Pelosi has been elected to the Democratic leader position again. I guess all of that hullabaloo about her exiting stage left was just that. So the goings-on in Washington, we await the decision by Donald Trump on Secretary of State. In the meantime, he can't stop. He just can't stop tweeting. He's still got time on his hands. Now he's all excited about the jobs in Indiana. This is something he's taking full credit for. If you examine this story, perhaps the kind of jobs that he promised versus and what Carrier is doing with their jobs are two different things. But he also suggests that we got to pay attention to the Ohio State story, as tragic as that is. Why he decides to point out that ISIS is taking credit for the whole thing in this kind of random way is just part of the randomness of Donald Trump, which is obviously something we're going to get used to on a daily basis. Presidential? Not in my book, but I don't know. And what else did you tweet about? We had something else on the Twitter feed as well? Oh, yeah, that was yesterday's news on the flag. Again, I don't like to minimize this disease, but it's a version of political Tourette's that Donald Trump seems to have, and I don't know if there's a treatment for it. In the meantime, let us take on the topic at hand tonight, and that is Fidel Castro passing away at the age of 90. And our guest tonight is Professor Monica Simal, who is born and raised in Cuba and now teaches at Providence College. Welcome. Nice to have you. Come on in. Just move yourself in. I'll shake your hand. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for having me.
Born and raised in Cuba.
Yes, correct.
So perspective, I'm guessing, is both political and multicultural and all of that. The executive summary part of our conversation will be, what does this mean for America, do you think?
I think it depends on Trump. Depends on the new president. If he wants to reverse what Obama has done, or he wants to take a new approach and to be the part of the hard line that we had before. So it depends on what the president is looking for in his political views of the relationships that we have had so far with the Cuban government.
All right, we'll examine that a little bit in the next segment. What does your gut tell you? What do you want to see?
I think what Obama has done have been a big improvement in terms of the relationship that we had before. That it were in terms of the Cubans themselves, the citizens, they are afraid. They are afraid that the little light that they saw with Obama's visit can be reversed. But at the same time,
the Cubans in Cuba, the Cubans in America.
The Cubans in America are pretty much polarized, but at the same time, they want to see a free Cuba. And I don't know if Trump or any other president could do something about that, because it's something that has to be, it's a change that has to come from within. And American politics can change in terms of relationship with the Cuban government, but nothing has worked in the last 40 years. And Cuba is still a country governed by this Castrocracia, right? The members of this Castro family, they are still in power, and still the citizens of Cuba, they don't have freedom of speech, they don't have free internet. Well, at least the access or the ability to pay for it. It is crazy, and so it's a country that it has a lot of censorship. There's still people are afraid even to express their feelings, even toward the death of Fidel Castro. You will never hear a Cuban telling you the truth while you're living in Cuba. That's a reality.
So the mourning process that we're chronicling here journalistically, do you think it's authentic or it's forced?
There are some people who are being really authentic, but they haven't seen anything before. They grew up within this dictatorship. They have been forced to think like this. It's part of a circus that they are so accustomed to that they cannot really free by themselves. They don't know how to think freely if they haven't seen elections in 60 years. They don't know what two parties is about. They don't know how to be in a democratic society. So they pretty much they need a leader, and they had a leader that was forcing them to think this way. So they're, in a sense, they are being authentic, but there are so many others that they're afraid to be authentic, and you will never see them reacting in the way they want to react.
Their authenticity would be I mean, it's a strange human condition to celebrate somebody's death, but the idea that this thing might be loosening up now based on his death is not something that people are going to celebrate outwardly in Cuba.
I think the people that were celebrating, they are not celebrating the death of somebody, like physically talking about the death, being happy about the death of a human being.
Right.
What they are celebrating is more a symbolic gesture. It's a closing of an era that they think could be the end, but not necessarily, because we know that Raúl Castro is in power, because we know that the family members are going to be in power, because we don't have free elections. So it's not about celebrating, as a writer said it yesterday in the New Herald, Miami New Herald. It's not about celebrating the death of Fidel Castro. It's celebrating that we were surviving him, in a way that we were surviving this cruel society for so many years, living with a censor that was dictating us what to do. So pretty much it was a celebration of this historical figure who imposed his political views, and he was controlling the life of every single citizen in the island.
All right, we'll talk about the politics of this when we come back. Fascinating. Stay with us. In the meantime, I just want to remind you, if you're thinking, as you just had your holiday get-together, Thanksgiving, a little tough around the kitchen, moving around, navigating, you're thinking, you know what, that's it. We're renovating the kitchen or the bath. Cumberland Kitchen Bath Design Center would be a great choice for you. They were for me, on time and on budget. Go to their website, cumberlandkitchen.com, take a look at the before and after photos. I think you'll get a sense of how good their work is. We'll be right back. All right, so on the situation with Cuba, here's the latest from CBS.
Tens of thousands of Cubans lined up to pay their respects. Many of them cried and saluted as they passed the memorials for Fidel Castro. A 21-gun salute blasted over the city, launching a two-day ceremony in Revolution Plaza. Berta Corrales said the loss is painful, but I know he will always be with us. Although the former president has been widely vilified for isolating and oppressing the Cuban nation, many in Havana admire him as a revolutionary who stood up to the United States. But in Miami, the reaction has been decidedly different. Castro's passing brought celebration and activism. The exile community here in Little Havana is calling on Cuba to finally allow more freedom for its people now that Castro's shadow is gone.
It just leaves a lot of opportunity and hope and aspirations for a free and prosperous Cuba with opportunities for everyone.
Castro handed control to his brother Raúl 10 years ago. The new president has been negotiating diplomatic relations with the U.S., but President-elect Donald Trump tweeted Monday morning that he'll terminate those arrangements if Cuba doesn't offer a better deal. For now, Havana is focused on its week of mourning. On Wednesday, a procession will carry Castro's ashes to Santiago. The funeral is planned for Sunday in the birthplace of the revolution.
Reaction?
An important gesture here. The people are going to see just a picture of Fidel after a long line under the Cuban sun, the tropical sun, under hot weather temperatures, just to see a picture of Fidel with flowers. The ashes are not being displayed for the Cuban people, so they are crying in front of just a picture of Fidel, just about the rhetoric and the narrative of an image that is not really the body of Fidel. So who are the ones going to show tribute and to see the ashes? Are the ones from the elite. So the ashes of Fidel Castro have been displaced in a different place. So the Cuban people are not really paying a tribute to the ashes of Fidel Castro. They are only being displaced for the elite. So this is showing how polarized the Cuban society is. And you can read this narrative of what's going on with Fidel Castro's body, right? It's just now being shown to the ones that are part of his...
You really think that distinction matters?
It does, because it's telling you that they are not being sincere with the Cuban people and how the society is being divided now. It's a society that is...
Meaning the privilege to get a chance to actually go to a real wake.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cuban people just get a photo.
Exactly.
And do you think there's a sense on the ground in Cuba that Are people offended by that?
Probably they don't know they have been manipulated, and this is the way that the Cuban society has been divided too. So you have the elite, who are the ones who are receiving the benefits of all these Obama's new measurements and all these new politics toward Cuba. You have the elite, who is the one who is the beneficiary, the principal beneficiary of all these new steps. And you have the common Cuban citizen who is just crying the death of Fidel without really knowing what the future is going to be like, and being.
Well, it's fascinating because I never thought that to be anything more than logistics. You think there's a message there?
I think even if it's not explicitly thought in that way, you can actually think about that. Think about how the society is being structured. They are now like clearly like two different classes. So there is the elite, the members of the elite, the members of the government, and the Cuban people, who are the ones who are just not being the beneficiary of all these measures.
This is a fascinating, in a lot of ways, tragic dynamic, it seems to me, because American Cubans are split in some ways, but for the most part, if I think I'm correct in assuming that your sentiment carries the day in America. Mm-hmm. You have family back in Cuba that you haven't seen for 15 years. If and when you meet with them, well, first of all, do you know if they think the way you do? They couldn't say it publicly.
Exactly.
But do you think they think the way you do?
It is hard to know.
When and if you ever get together with them, will you be able to have a frank conversation with them about it?
I don't know. Sometimes Cubans think there is always a policeman right behind you, or you have microphones, or you have a second intention. So it's really hard for Cubans to open up in a conversation when it's regarding Cuban politics, and even regarding Fidel's death, which people cannot celebrate and turn on the music in Cuba. Sure. So you really have to mourn for 9 days now. Do you know?
And I don't want to just make this all about you and your family, but I think it's fascinating. Do you know if does your family want to leave Cuba, or does it want to live in a Cuba that's a better place, or you're still not sure?
Many of my relatives left Cuba a long time ago, in the 60s and the 70s. We have had different waves of within my family of immigration, like kind of like the whole history of Cuban immigration. So I have family members here from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Yeah. And I still have some family members in Cuba who decided, just probably because we're afraid of leaving the status quo, or because they want to venture to a new place, or just because they were just accustomed to being there. So I don't really know what is the answer, because it's really sad to abandon your country and to try to find a way to live in another place.
So the president has obviously historically loosened up relationships with Cuba. There's split thought about that amongst the American Cuban community. You've already told me that you lean toward this being a positive development. What worries you about what Donald Trump might say and what he tweeted out on Monday?
I don't know if this is a positive development or not, because Fidel Castro was politically dead like 10 years ago when he got sick and his brother took his position. So technically it doesn't mean anything. For me, it was just another news. Yes, symbolically it meant a lot, but for how this is going to be translated, it meant like this figure that we grew up seeing.
You're talking about the death of Fidel.
Yes.
When we come back, I want to talk about the difference between Obama's approach and Trump's potential approach. Then again, Donald Trump's approach tomorrow could be different, because that's what Donald Trump is all about. Stay with us. What do you worry about in terms of what Donald Trump has tweeted and what he says?
I think it is hard to trust Donald Trump, and we don't know what's going to happen with him. I don't know if I'm going to see a Trump Tower in Cuba pretty soon.
Well, reportedly he's peeling off the business, so I don't know. Obviously, though, the family still has the Trump name, and who knows how that's going to look, right?
So it is hard to guess what his decision is going to be, what his approach is going to be. But
he wants a better deal for the Cuban people, he tweeted.
Can we trust that?
Well, I don't know. What would you, if he asked you, Professor, what is the best deal the Cuban people can have right now, what would you tell him?
The best deal for Cuban people for Cuban people would be to have free elections. And the change has to become from within, from the Cuban citizens, not from the United States. Cubans are to be the ones to decide for the future, and it's something that we have been not fighting for so many years. So I think the Cuban civil society is trying to make changes, and the dissidents are trying to make changes in Cuba, but we don't have leaders, like strong leaders coming from these dissidents or from the civil society, because it's also not compact. It's also like a variety of people with different thoughts about how Cuba should be look in the future.
The concept of free election is one thing. How to execute is a whole different matter, correct?
Exactly. So it is hard because we have a government controlling everything, and we don't have changes in the Constitution, and we have now Raúl in power. So even if Cubans are tired of this situation, how are they going to change it? It's not that easy.
He's no spring chicken either. What happens after Raúl?
Oh, his son and his son-in-law, they are behind.
So it's family.
The family is the Castrocracia.
There's no change in sight here.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Unless it's forced from the outside.
Well, that also could be problematic, because I don't know if Cubans want that force from outside, and we don't want a war. We don't want conflict. So it has to be solved in a way from within, from the Cubans inside the island. With, of course,
are the economics in Cuba such that it'll bubble up organically from the Cuban people, or is the quality of life good enough, at least within the limits of not having free expression and the like, to have this thing go on perpetually?
Well, we know that Fidel Castro destroyed the Cuban economy because he was the one telling the farmers what to do, what to plant, and which land to plant it, and he was the expert on everything. Since he was the expert on everything, he destroyed the Cuban economy. So now the Cuban economy depends on the tourism and depends on the Americans going to spend their money on the island, and Raúl knows that, and he's open to that. But at the same time, he's opening the doors to tourists, but he's repressing Cubans, and he's repressing the Cubans who want to have a voice and who are criticizing the government. So now that they are mourning Fidel Castro's death, all the dissidents are, many of them, they are right now in jail. So that's what we have. We have a man who died, or we have two men, like two different men that just died the same day. A Fidel Castro who was followed by the left, who was admired, and he was a mythical figure, and a Fidel Castro who was a dictator.
All right. You have a 10-second prediction?
I just want to see my country free, and it's really sad to continue with more generations of people indoctrinated in believing that Fidel Castro was a hero.
It's not a prediction, it's a wish.
It's a wish.
And I don't blame you. I got to run. Thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
Well, final word when we come back.